It was the summer of 1988 in Washington, North Carolina, a quiet southern town where people left their doors unlocked and still trusted their neighbors. But inside one of those houses, something dark was brewing. By the end of that summer, one man would be dead, another near death, and the person behind it all would turn out to be someone no one expected. This is the story of Leith and Bonnie von Stein and the murder that turned fantasy into fatal reality. Hey guys, and welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast, a true crime podcast featuring myself, Mandy, and my dear friend, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Mandy. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Mandy, you are much more of a cook than I am. I've been trying to make some freezer meals now that we're going into cooler weather and stuff. And every day that I've done this, I've sliced my finger. I'm on my third finger. I'm running out.
No.
Took a chunk out on a cheese grater, and I was like, this is why I don't cook. I'm also not good at it.
As long as it doesn't end up in the Wendy's chili, like our episode.
This week. No, it was. My husband was looking through the cheese. I'm like, no, I can see it's still here. It's just floppy. But he was like, I don't want this cheese. I'm like, I sacrificed my finger for it. You guys are eating this cheese. So
no, but cutting your finger like that and especially when it's a small slice, it is so painful forever. So I recently did kind of a similar thing. I cut my finger on a can or something that I was trying to open.
Oh.
And so it just sliced, but where it is right on where my finger bends on my index finger. And so for the last week, I can barely even pick things up because every time I bend my finger, I can feel it. It stings, it burns. And it didn't even look that serious. It was just a tiny little cut. So yeah, that is the worst.
Absolutely. One of them I got from just picking up the knife, trying to clean. I'm like, now I can't cook or clean. This is just, this is God's way of telling me that I should just be
sit down.
A princess. Yeah.
Just sit down.
I'm not doing anything.
All right, we'll get into the story for this week. There's a lot to get into with this one, and I'm excited to tell this story. So Leith Peter von Stein was the kind of man who made life look easy. He was the kind of guy that everyone else in town would point to and say, now there's someone who did it right. He was born in 1946 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to Howard and Marie von Stein. They were a hardworking couple who owned a successful dry cleaning company. The family wasn't very flashy, but they lived a comfortable life, and Leith grew up with a really good head on his shoulders and a very clear understanding of how money and finances worked. After finishing school, Leith joined the Army in the late 1960s. He served during a time when the country was still reeling from Vietnam and this social upheaval of that time period. His military years gave him structure, discipline, and really that quiet kind of confidence that people naturally trusted. Once he got out of the Army, he transitioned into something completely new for that era, and that was computer programming. Now, this was the 1970s. This is back when computers were the size of refrigerators and nobody really even understood what they did, but Leith did, and that made him really valuable. He got a job at Intagon Corporation. It was a big insurance and finance company, and he started building a solid life for himself. That's actually where he met Bonnie Bates. Bonnie was a single mom with 2 kids named Christopher and Angela. She'd really been through a lot. She'd already been through a divorce, financial struggles, and she was just trying to hold everything together, but she still had a warmth about her. She was kind, social, and steady in a way that made people feel at ease around her. And Leith was also immediately drawn to her. Friends said that they balanced each other out perfectly. Bonnie was really open and nurturing, and Leith was practical and dependable. So the couple started dating, and before long, they were married. For Bonnie, it was like getting a second chance at happiness. Leith was devoted not just to her, but also to her kids. He treated Chris and Angela like they were his own, and people said he seemed genuinely very proud to be a stepdad. When Leith took a new job as a chief auditor at National Spinning Company, which was one of the largest employers in eastern North Carolina, the family packed up and moved to Washington. No, not the state. It's actually a quiet little town that locals affectionately call the original Washington.
I love it.
This is in North Carolina. So the von Steins moved into a beautiful 2-story home in the upscale Smallwood neighborhood. And this place is really perfect for Leith because it's the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are trimmed to military precision and everybody's mailbox matches. Leith fit right in. He was the kind of man who would wave to his neighbors, and he volunteered at church and I'm sure also loved to maintain his lawn.
Yeah.
He worked very long hours to provide for his family. To everyone looking in, they were living the dream. They had a big house, nice cars, and a solid marriage. But behind closed doors, that perfect southern facade was starting to crack.
The von Steins' younger child, Angela, was easygoing and well-liked. She got along with everyone. She made good grades and pretty much did everything right. But her brother Chris, well, Chris was the exact opposite of that. He was intelligent, but he had that dangerous mix of laziness and ego that really can make a smart kid spiral. He loved attention and seemed to crave a sense of power. He was someone that would do things just to stand out. One classmate actually remembered him showing up to school with a python draped around his neck. I cannot imagine. Leith, though, didn't find it charming. He believed that Chris was someone that needed structure. Obviously, he's from the military, so he knows how much structure can help. Maybe also a little humility wouldn't hurt him, and definitely he needed a plan for the future. But Chris really wasn't interested in playing by Leith's rules. Their relationship really turned into this constant power struggle. Leith was trying to shape Chris into a responsible young man, and Chris was doing literally everything he could to rebel against that. By the time Chris graduated high school in 1987, the tension in that house could have powered the whole neighborhood. Still, though, Leith really wanted what was best for his stepson. He helped Chris enroll at North Carolina State University in Raleigh. He even covered his tuition, housing, books, and a weekly allowance, which, wow, that's a lot. And he told friends that he was proud of Chris. He was hopeful even. He really believed that college might be the thing that finally got him focused. But to the shock of no one, it did not. Chris spent most of his time partying, sleeping in, and diving into what would become his biggest obsession, fantasy role-playing games. He became immersed in them. These weren't just a hobby, these were really an escape for him. And as his grades started to tank, Leith's patience wore thin. And so that spring, Leith made it clear, either Chris gets his act together or the money train is over. And he told him flat out that if he didn't improve his grades, he'd stop paying for college altogether, which really seems very fair to have to face consequences when
Right.
you're just not trying. And he definitely knew he could do better. But this threat really hits Chris like a brick wall because, in his mind, that's not Leith's money. It's his birthright. He believed that he was entitled to this lifestyle, to the house, to the wealth, to everything. So when Leith started pulling back the reins, Chris didn't just feel embarrassed, he felt betrayed. And when he started talking to his friends at North Carolina State about it, saying that his stepfather was ruining his life, they didn't know they were about to get pulled into something that would soon cross from fantasy into fatal reality.
Once Chris got to NC State, his world opened up, but not exactly in the way his parents hoped it would. Instead of discovering independence, he found a crew of misfits who were really just as adrift as he was. They were the type of crew who spent all night huddled around tables in the student union or cramped up in dorm rooms, fueled by Mountain Dew, bad pizza, and just pure imagination, which, if you've ever been to college, you totally get that. But that's where Chris met a guy named Neil Henderson. He was a quiet and awkward student who was more book smart than street smart. He wasn't exactly cool, but he had what Chris needed, and that was a car and a willingness to please. He also had a tendency to go along with whatever made him feel accepted. Through Neil, Chris was introduced to James Bartlett Upchurch, who went by Bart. He was a 21-year-old former NC State student who had stayed in the orbit of the campus crowd even after he dropped out. So Bart was older, he was more charismatic, and he was absolutely obsessed with role-playing games, specifically Dungeons & Dragons. Now, before we go any further, this is the late 1980s. This is the height of what the media called the Satanic Panic. It's actually crazy because this came up in a recent episode, the Krugersdorp killings, and before that, I don't think we've ever really mentioned Satanic Panic in the whole life of this podcast. So it's wild that it's come up in a couple different stories. But parents at that time were convinced that Dungeons and Dragons was a gateway to demon worship and murder and really just ultimately the downfall of all civilization. In reality, it's mostly just nerdy kind of kids rolling dice and arguing about, elves and stuff.
I
So
know
it's
nothing about it.
the
Have you ever played it or been
no,
around it?
I have not played it. I have only heard of it, obviously. Growing up, I know what it is, but no, I have never actually played. But with that said, in this case, the line between fantasy and reality really actually did start to blur. Chris didn't just play Dungeons and Dragons, he lived it. He created elaborate characters. He would often cast himself as the leader or the villain. He would always choose someone powerful, untouchable, and really cruel. And he took the games very seriously. And Bart, who was a self-proclaimed dungeon master, really encouraged this. He liked the control, and he liked being the one who decided who lived and who died in these fictional worlds. So when Chris started venting about how much he hated his stepfather and talking about how Leith was cutting him off and how he'd ruined his life, and how he didn't deserve the money, Bart just listened to all this and never really shut it down. He just kind of leaned into it. It started off as dark jokes and hypothetical conversations. They were having late night, what if talks that really felt more like plot lines from their campaigns. But soon, those fantasy discussions started sounding less like pretend and more like real planning. And we have so much more to get into after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
You know that feeling when you finally find something that actually makes your house look put together? That is me with my new 16-pair shoe storage cabinet from Wayfair. It looks so chic, like my shoes are now actually put away. They're not just lined up or kicked around on the floor pretending to be.
You sent me a picture of that earlier this week, and man, that thing is gorgeous. And perfect timing because Wayfair's Black Friday sale is happening all month long. You can get up to 70% off everything home, furniture, decor, even those "why didn't I buy this sooner" pieces.
Right? And it ships so fast, and now my entryway looks like a Pinterest board instead of a lost and found bin. Wayfair really does make it easy to find pieces that look great and actually fit your space.
So if you're getting ready for the holidays or just ready for your home to look a little more you, Wayfair's got you covered. Shop their Black Friday sale all month long at wayfair.com.
Don't miss out on early Black Friday deals. Head to wayfair.com now to shop Wayfair's Black Friday deals for up to 70% off. That's WAYFAIR.com. Sale ends December 7th. You know how every holiday season there's that temptation to splurge on some random thing, with all these sales going on? Well, this year, if you're going to splurge, have it be something that actually matters, like my Bowl and Branch sheets.
Oh, that's the kind of splurge that pays off every single night. Their bedding isn't just cozy, it feels like it was made to last. And this time of year, being warm and comfortable in bed really is the best feeling there even is.
Totally. Their signature sheets are 100% organic cotton. They're soft and breathable, and they somehow get softer every single time you wash them. And not only do they keep you warm this time of year, but they somehow keep you cool in the summer. I honestly can't go back to anything else now.
And the best part, Bowl and Branch's biggest sale of the year is happening right now with 25% off site-wide. So if you've been waiting to upgrade your bedding, here's your sign.
Give yourself and your loved ones the most extraordinary feeling sleep with 25% off site-wide, plus free shipping and extended returns during Bowl and Branch's best sale of the year. Shop now at bowlandbranch.com/moms with code MOMS. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/moms, code MOMS for 25% off. Exclusions apply. And now back to the episode. So before the break, we met Chris von Stein. He's this college kid who goes from really failing classes that his stepdad's paying for to actually fantasizing about killing him. And now that fantasy was really about to take shape. So Chris's bitterness towards Leith wasn't just teenage angst anymore. It was bordering on obsession. He was talking constantly about his stepfather's money, the family's house, and the life he thought should have been his. And in those long nights with Bart and Neil, the conversations about Leith started to turn darker. He'd say things like, if he were gone, everything would be easier. And Bart didn't stop him. In fact, he started to nurture that idea. He played right into Chris's fantasies of power and revenge. And in Chris's mind, there was a lot of money at stake. Leith had a $700,000 life insurance policy and a $600,000 trust fund that was up for grabs, or so he thought. At one point, Bart even told Chris that he could arrange something, that he, somehow as a college student, knew people who could take care of Leith for him. And whether Bart actually did know people or not, it really didn't matter because Chris believed him. And this delusion started to snowball. The plan really started to take shape in fragments. Bart would recruit someone to help, Neil would drive, and Chris would be the one to give them the details, like where his family lived, or what time they went to bed, or how to get into the house. Meanwhile, Leith and Bonnie had no idea what was brewing behind the scenes. They thought their son was focused on college, maybe struggling a little bit, but he was still trying. Bonnie, of course, his mom, worried about him constantly. She would drive to Raleigh to visit with him, to slip him a little extra cash, and to try to encourage him to do better. But Chris had already made up his mind. He told his friends that his stepfather had ruined his life and that he'd rather see him dead than live under his control, which is kind of a wild thing to have somebody paying for your entire lifestyle.
Right.
And to be like, yeah, this man doesn't control me.
Right.
Well, a little, he is paying for your stuff. But by the summer of 1988, the game was really no longer pretend. Chris and Bart started meeting up off campus. They were away from their usual crowd. They were talking about logistics like gloves and weapons, timing, and even what they'd do afterwards. Neil later said that he thought the whole thing was really just talk, that Chris was venting and Bart was just feeding into this fantasy. But when Chris started talking about insurance policies and inheritance money, it became chillingly clear. He wasn't just fantasizing about killing Leith von Stein, he was actually planning it. And the craziest part, he thought he'd get away with it.
A couple of weeks before the attack, Chris actually tried to go through with it once on his own. He drove home one weekend and told his parents that he was heading out to see some friends, but instead he met up with Bart in Raleigh. That's when Bart handed him a bag of crushed sleeping pills, and then Chris went back home and mixed those sleeping pills into the family's hamburgers at dinner. He was hoping that they would all pass out while he set up what was supposed to look like an electrical fire. So their plan was to make everything look like an accident. They were going to try and make it look like a freak fire in the fuse box. Chris told Bart that he would drug his family so they would sleep through it. Then they could crush a fuse, pour gas on the wall, and set it up to look like a short circuit kind of situation.
There are so many reasons you would get caught doing this, like
Yeah.
throwing gasoline. The first thing you're going to do going in that house is think, it smells like fire and gasoline.
Right.
From the jump, this is a horrible idea, and I
Terrible.
can't believe these idiots thought this would be a good thing to do.
Right. But Chris also told Bart that it was fine with him if his sister Angela was also home. He said either way, it would all be quick and clean, which, like you just said, there's nothing clean about this plan at all. But the fuse trick actually didn't work, and this plan to accidentally kill them all kind of fizzled out. Instead of stopping there, though, Chris decided that the next time they tried would be a lot more direct and far more brutal. As the summer crept closer, the plan started moving forward in small, calculated steps. Chris was returning home more often, but it wasn't to reconcile. He was actually just there scoping out the layout of the house, really paying attention to which of the doors stayed unlocked and the time that his parents went to bed and how long it took them to fall asleep. He even drew diagrams of all these things. He told Bart exactly where to go, where Leith's room was, and how to avoid waking his mom up. The plan was simple in theory. Get in, kill Leith, get out. But in reality, this was a disaster waiting to happen. Chris didn't want to do any of this himself. He was too afraid to actually get his own hands dirty. So Bart volunteered to do it, saying that he had been in situations before, which, by the way, was a lie. He had not been in any situations. And what are you doing, Bart? But his version of experience was really limited to dice rolls and imaginary duels. They ended up looping in Neil Henderson as the getaway driver, though Neil later said he thought they were just going to rough Leith up, which, sure, maybe he thought that. I feel like he might have known there was more going on just because Chris didn't seem shy about saying everything that he felt about his stepfather.
Seemed like it was very much talked about out in the open.
Out in the open.
With those three.
Right. So Chris gave Bart everything he needed. Now Bart has the address, directions to Smallwood, and even the promise of a cut of this inheritance money. So after all of this planning and after, coming up with this whole idea, Chris decided that he would stay in Raleigh for the entire night, so that way he would be surrounded by friends who would be able to vouch for him later and give him an alibi. Meanwhile, Bart carried out the plan and Neil served as the getaway driver. Chris had claimed that Leith had hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, and if he died, it would all go to his mom, Bonnie, and eventually it would go to Chris. This fantasy, however, is all built on lies, but to Bart and Neil, this just sounds like easy money. And on the night of July 24th, 1988, their fantasy finally came to life in the worst possible way.
Here's where I'm confused. You're killing your stepdad, knowing that the money goes to your mom, and eventually it goes to you. So
Right.
you're saying you could be waiting 20, 30, 40 years before you get this easy money, and this idiot with you is willing to kill somebody and wait to
I do
it?
counter that with his other train of thought could be that with Leith out of the way, I'll have an easier time manipulating my mother to get my
Oh,
way. And you know what I'm saying? Maybe he
that makes
thought
more sense.
he would have easier access to the money if it was in his mom's control, which unfortunately we have heard of cases like that, where
Yeah.
children take advantage of their parents in that type of way, or they just know how to manipulate their parents to get what they want. And I get the impression he wasn't getting that from Leith, and maybe he thought he could have a shot at that with his mom.
No, that makes more sense because I was thinking more life insurance policies, but you're right. He had lots of money in the bank, so that would be stuff he would have access to more quickly.
Yeah.
So it was a hot, humid summer night in Washington, North Carolina, and inside the Von Stein house, everything looked peaceful. Leith and Bonnie had spent the day visiting family, and then they came home around 11 p.m. They went through their usual nighttime routine. Bonnie took a shower, Leith read in bed, and by midnight, the house was quiet. But about 2 hours later, that calm was turned into a full-blown storm. Bart Upchurch and Neil Henderson loaded into Neil's gray 1982 Honda and drove down Highway 264 towards Washington. Bart had a sleeping bag, a knife, and a baseball bat. All things you'd expect in a crime that was supposed to be quick and clean, at least in their very delusional minds. Neil was behind the wheel. He was anxious and he was chain smoking. He said he didn't want to be there, but he also didn't want to lose this approval of Chris or Bart. Peer pressure mixed with greed is really a dangerous cocktail, and Neil was really drunk on both. So Bart had double-checked the directions. These were things that Chris had repeated to him, like the layout of the house, which windows were unlocked there, where the bedrooms were, all those things they would need when they went to the house. At one point, Neil, I guess, wisened up a little and said, "What do we do if Bonnie wakes up?" And Bart really shrugged it off, and he said, "We'll deal with it." And that phrase, "we'll deal with it," really would haunt him later. The two reached Washington a little after 3 a.m. Neil parked down the street from the Von Stein's home, keeping his headlights off. They crept towards the house, careful to stay in the shadows. Bart wore gloves and carried the knife and bat, while Neil, who was terrified but obedient, followed behind him. They slipped in through the back door, which was open, and officers later would say they found a slit in the screen and broken glass on the back porch. Upstairs, Leith and Bonnie were asleep in their bed, completely unaware that two young men, who were actually friends of their son, were standing in their hallway. Bart whispered to Neil which room, and Neil pointed. The two stepped inside, and within seconds, the nightmare began.
Leith woke up first. He saw movement in the dark. It was just a shadowy figure kind of at the edge of his vision, but before he could react, Bart swung the bat. And the first blow hit very hard. Leith tried to fight back, and there was struggling and shouting, but he was no match for these two young male attackers. Bart hit him again and again until Leith fell to the floor with blood pooling around him. Bonnie woke up to the sound of this attack, and she was very confused and, of course, terrified. As she turned towards the noise, Bart turned the knife on her. He stabbed her in the chest 3 times. Bonnie screamed, and the sound echoed through the house loud enough that neighbors later said they thought they could have heard something, but they dismissed it as nothing more than just something on late-night TV. When Bonnie went silent, Bart and Neil ran. They left Leith lying on the bedroom floor, beaten and bleeding, and Bonnie, who was barely conscious, in a pool of her own blood. They raced back down the hall and out the side door and into the night. Neil was shaking and he kept asking, "Are they dead? Are they dead?" And Bart, who was covered in blood, just kind of said, "It's done." Bart changed out of his bloodied clothes and he tossed them, along with the knife, the maps, and the rubber sole of a Reebok shoe, onto the side of the highway and set them on fire.
These three are such idiots. Why are you going to put a fire somewhere so people now have, oh, what's this fire? Let's go up to it. There's a knife. There's, a map. There's all this stuff. This seems weird. I should call the police. What?
Right. And it really is insane because someone did call the police, like a passerby, a farmer that lived nearby, saw a fire on the side of the road and obviously
Exactly.
called the police because why is there a fire on the side of the highway? So, yeah, it's not very inconspicuous. By sunrise, the two of them were back in Raleigh, pretending like nothing had happened. A few hours later, around 4:45 a.m., Chris got a call from his sister Angela. She was hysterical and was telling him that their parents had been attacked. Chris told her that he was so distraught he wouldn't even be able to drive, and he asked campus police to take him home. The scene was absolutely horrific. At the Von Stein home, Bonnie was drifting in and out. She heard the bedroom door close softly, and then she heard thumps and whooshes through the wall, and she feared for her daughter Angela. She crawled for the phone and pulled it to her chest, and at 4:27 a.m., she was able to dial 911. She said, "This is an emergency. My husband may be dying, and I think I may be too." Responding officers found the back door standing open. There was broken glass on the inside porch, and upstairs, Leith was unfortunately really beyond help. He had already passed, and Bonnie was barely alive with the phone receiver still in her hand. When the police and paramedics did arrive, they found that Bonnie's skull was fractured, her lung was punctured, she had stab wounds to her chest and neck, and Leith, unfortunately, was already gone. Early interviews focused on the theory of a burglary gone wrong. That was until detectives noticed that nothing valuable seemed to be missing. The only cash taken had been stashed in a specific spot that only the family knew about, which suggested that the killer wasn't a stranger.
So when police tracked down Chris at his apartment in Raleigh, he played the role of the shocked, grieving son. He reminded them that he'd been in Raleigh the entire weekend, surrounded by friends, so, they could confirm it, which they did. And that airtight alibi is exactly why he had stayed there all weekend. He began to cry. He was asking questions. He told them he couldn't believe anyone would want to hurt his family. But detectives really weren't buying it. They'd already noticed how oddly detached he seemed and how his story didn't quite match up. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, investigators found muddy footprints and tire tracks near the side of the house. The tread would end up matching Neil Henderson's Honda. And it didn't take long for police to start connecting the dots. Once they did, everything really unraveled. Within days, they questioned Neil, who really cracked almost immediately. He confessed that he'd driven Bart to the Von Stein house and that the attack had been planned by Chris. Neil told detectives that Chris wanted his stepfather dead for the money. He said Chris had talked about it for weeks, about how Leith had life insurance and how his death would make everything easier. He even told them about the Dungeons and Dragons connection, how Chris had turned their role-playing game into a real-world quest where Leith was the enemy and Bart was the assassin. This blows my mind that, it is this blurry line. I played a lot of the Oregon Trail when I was younger and killed a lot of people that you don't like on there. It doesn't mean I'm really thinking I want to hurt other people.
Right.
It's just wild to me that they take this so literally and it turns into this. So the more Neil talked, though, the clearer it became that this was in no way a random act of violence. It was a scripted murder. Police arrested Chris Von Stein on July 31st, 1988, just 1 week after his stepfather's murder. Bart Upchurch was taken into custody. When the story hit the news, people were stunned. There's this well-off, clean-cut college kid from a respected family, and they're learning that he'd orchestrated a murder straight out of a fantasy novel. And the woman who survived it, Bonnie, had to wake up every day knowing her own son had planned her death. And we still have more to get into after one last break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
You know how in so many cases the most important clue gets overlooked? We kind of do that with our own health too. We'll notice when we're tired or feeling off, but we don't always think about what's actually behind it. Turns out our liver is quietly handling over 500 jobs every single day, processing what we eat, helping with energy, digestion, even vitamin storage. So lately, I've been giving my liver a little extra support with Dose for Your Liver. It's a clinically backed liquid supplement that comes in a quick 2-ounce shot, and it seriously tastes like fresh squeezed orange juice. It's made to support your liver's daily function so it can do what it's supposed to do, keeping everything running smoothly. No sugar, no junk, no calories, just clean, effective support. And the best part? It's all backed by real science with 2 double-blind placebo-controlled studies showing positive impact on liver enzyme levels. For me, it's just become one of those small daily habits that actually feels worth it because if my liver's working this hard for me, the least I can do is give it a little backup.
So if you're ready to solve the mystery of why you've been feeling off, check out dosedaily.co/moms or Inner Moms to get 35% off your first subscription. Your body does so much for you. Let's do something for it. That's dosedaily.co/moms for 35% off your first month subscription. And now back to the episode.
Before the break, Chris von Stein's murder plot had finally come to life. His stepfather, Leith, was dead. His mother, Bonnie, had miraculously survived the attack, and Chris's perfect alibi was starting to crack. Now the investigation started to unravel, and the truth about what really happened inside the von Stein home began to surface. Once the arrests hit the news, the sleepy town of Washington, North Carolina turned into a media circus. Reporters camped outside the von Stein house, the high school, and the church, really anywhere that someone might be able to offer a soundbite about this quote-unquote all-American family turned true crime headline. And really everyone just wanted to know why. Investigators quickly realized they were dealing with something that wasn't just premeditated, it was scripted. Neil Henderson, who was desperate to save himself, gave the police a detailed confession. He said that Chris had been plotting his stepfather's murder for months and was dangling promises of cash and inheritance money to whoever would help him pull it off. He told them how Chris had drawn maps of the house. He literally sketched out where Leith and Bonnie slept and even provided Bart with a list of what to bring, including gloves, a knife, and a bat. He said that Chris was supposed to come along that night, but he lost his nerve at the last minute and stayed in Raleigh to make sure his alibi would hold up. Neil said he'd believed it would just be a robbery and some kind of a scare tactic and something that would maybe just teach Leith a lesson. But when he heard the screaming, the reality hit him. They weren't just there scaring someone, they were destroying an entire family. Police immediately arrested Bart and soon after, Chris. Bart folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. He told the investigators absolutely everything, including how Chris had manipulated him, how he thought he was going to get a cut of a $2 million inheritance, and how they'd talked about this for weeks like it was a mission. And to make all of this even weirder, Bart described their planning sessions as if they were role-playing scenarios. Chris was the mastermind, Bart was the assassin, Neil was the scout. It was really like Dungeons and Dragons had been turned into a literal murder plot. The public went crazy with this. The headlines pretty much said Dungeons and Dragons murder plot in North Carolina. And reporters latched onto the idea that a tabletop game had somehow brainwashed these young men.
When Chris was questioned, though, he denied everything. He claimed that Bart and Neil acted on their own, that he had no idea they were going to kill anyone. But the evidence, of course, told a completely different story. Investigators found his handwritten house diagram, as well as letters between him and Bart referencing the plan, and even notes about the Von Stein's life insurance policy. They even uncovered a notebook where Chris had written what sounded like murder fantasy entries, calling his stepfather the target. Meanwhile, Bonnie Von Stein, the woman who barely survived her son's murder plot, was recovering at Pitt County Memorial Hospital. She had a long road of recovery. She had to relearn how to walk and speak. Her right lung had collapsed, and she had deep lacerations across her face and chest. Yet when investigators visited her bedside, she cooperated fully. When they told her Chris had been arrested, she was really stunned, but she didn't deny it. She said, quote, "I know he was angry, but I never thought he'd do something like this," end quote. The case finally went to trial in 1989, and from the first day, the courtroom was packed. There were students, reporters, locals. Everyone wanted to see this real-life Dungeons and Dragons killer. Ultimately, Bart Upchurch took a plea deal, and he agreed to testify against Chris in exchange for a reduced sentence. Neil Henderson also cooperated, giving prosecutors a first-hand account of the night of the attack. The star witness, though, was Bonnie. She took the stand with visible scars and a steady voice and told the court how she woke up to the attack, how she watched her husband die, and how she crawled for help with her son's name echoing in her head. The prosecution painted Chris as a spoiled, manipulative narcissist, a young man who saw his stepfather's success as a threat, not an inspiration. They said he'd grown up tired of being told no, and rather than work for his own life, he decided to take someone else's. The defense tried to argue that Chris was a victim of Bart's influence, that Bart was really the true instigator, and that Chris was just playing along with this fantasy talk that got out of control. But luckily, the jury did not buy this. After hours of deliberation, they found Christopher von Stein guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison plus 40 years. Bart Upchurch received a 30-year sentence for second-degree murder, and Neil Henderson got 20.
Even after the verdict, the case refused to fade away. The media couldn't get enough of the fantasy-turned-fatal storyline. So documentaries popped up, a best-selling book called Cruel Doubt hit the shelves, and it was followed by a made-for-TV miniseries starring Blythe Danner and Gwyneth Paltrow. People argued over what the case actually meant. Some said that it was proof that violent media and role-playing warped young minds, and others said it was a lesson in privilege. They said that Chris thought he could manipulate everyone around him and walk away clean because that's what he'd always done. But for Bonnie, this wasn't philosophy. This was her life. She moved away from Washington and quietly rebuilt what she could. She rarely spoke publicly about the attack ever again. Those who knew her said she had forgiven her son, not because she excused his behavior, but because she didn't want to live the rest of her life in bitterness. In interviews years later, investigators said the hardest part of the case was the lack of remorse. Chris von Stein never apologized, never took any responsibility. He continued to insist that Bart was the real killer, even though it was his plan, his house, and his family. And while the Cruel Doubt coverage did fade from the headlines, the story stuck in people's minds, not just because it was horrific, but because it really shattered this illusion that evil can only come from the outside.
After the trial ended, Washington, North Carolina was never the same. The von Stein home, once this pristine white column symbol of comfort and wealth, became a landmark of tragedy. People drove by just to see it, this murder house that was on the corner. Neighbors who'd known the family for years said it felt like a betrayal of the town's peace, that if something horrific like this could happen in their Smallwood neighborhood, it could really happen anywhere. For Bonnie von Stein, the aftermath was both physical and emotional. She spent months in recovery relearning basic tasks and battling the trauma of knowing her son was behind it all. The attack left her with lasting injuries, nerve damage, chronic pain, and deep scars that would really never fully heal. But in the years that followed, Bonnie showed an almost superhuman kind of grace. Despite everything, she chose to forgive Chris. She said she couldn't carry the hate anymore, and in one rare interview, she said, quote, "If I don't forgive him, I'm just letting him keep destroying my life," end quote. Bonnie eventually moved away from Washington and remarried, choosing to live life quietly. Friends said she never stopped being warm and kind, that even after everything she'd survived, she still believed in people. Chris, on the other hand, was transferred to Craven Correctional Institution, where he began serving his life sentence. He continued to deny responsibility, telling anyone who'd listen that Bart Upchurch was the real mastermind and that he'd been set up. Over the years, he filed multiple appeals, all of which were denied. He also participated in a few interviews for documentaries and maintained his innocence with that same flat, emotionless tone that had really unsettled the jurors years before. Meanwhile, Bart was paroled after serving roughly half of his 30-year sentence. He kept a low profile, worked odd jobs, moving often, and never really staying anywhere long enough for his past to catch up to him. Neil did the same. After serving his time, he moved out of state, got married, and by all accounts tried to disappear completely. But no matter what, none of them could ever truly escape what happened that night.
I know I say it every single time, but I am so bothered by stories of children murdering their parents. Like, I don't even have any other words. I'm scared. I feel like we've done too many of these stories. I don't want to think about the possibility of this happening.
No, I totally get it. It's so sad to me because if you and we've said this before too, if you think any of these plans through, all the things that have to go right for you to get this ultimate plan include destroying your mom because you're killing her husband, destroying your sister because she loves her dad. All of these things for you to ultimately get money and get, I guess, a little power instead of, I don't know, your dad's paying for you to go to school.
Right.
He's got a big in with computers. Maybe you could learn something and make more money than him. It's just so short-sighted and just makes me so sad because it doesn't have to be like that. None of this had to happen. And getting other people involved too, they ruin their lives. So
Right.
it's just so freaking insane and sad. And I just hate it for everyone.
And it's just doubly frustrating because what was Chris doing? He wasn't doing anything. He was barely even going to class. He wasn't
Right.
actually working hard. So it's like, why do you feel entitled to even have wealth and fortune and money? Like, why do you think that
Yeah.
you deserve that? Like, and what are you going to do when you get it? Still nothing. You're not going to do anything productive. You're going to sit and play games and just not, not go to class or not do anything. Like, that's also frustrating about it, but like you said, there's never a good reason for you to feel like you have to hurt somebody for money, and when you have all the opportunities right in front of you. That's about this case. It's like, why? Like, you were getting everything paid for. There are so many people out there, college kids, who would love to have a step parent or anybody who could pay for their, living expenses and for their schooling, and would be very thankful for that. So yeah, it's just you can see why some people look at this case and they're like, wow, this was just a very spoiled, like, entitled brat that
Yeah.
couldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you would, please rate, subscribe, review, all of those things, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to us. Make sure you have hit the subscribe button, and it really helps the show, and we really, really appreciate it.
All right, guys, that's it for this week. We will see you back next week. Same time, same place, new story.
Have a great week.
Bye.